talk about what are the global trends that we are seeing in terms of, digital completely disrupting some of the HR models. We will talk about how, the transformation, the HR transformation is getting slowly morphed into something very, very different from what, sometimes organizations start with. We will talk about the value in the process, what value, why organizations are adopting digital as methods to engage, to run some of their HR activities. And finally, some key considerations which we have to be probably careful of when we try and do an HR transformation. So one of the key things which is happening in the overall digital space and especially affecting HR is completely changing the user experience, improving the user interface to make it very, very interactive, intuitive, to a large extent idiot-proof. You don't need to do anything, you don't need to learn anything, you can just go in and start using the system. Analytics is the need of the day. Organizations, and probably 86% of the organizations in a recent survey said that they understand that it is something which you can't do without. Now, I think the focus is very clearly on how do I analyze what my people are thinking, what my people are talking about, what my people want, and how do I engage with them, how do I increase their motivation levels, how do I increase their productivity levels. And HR analytics forms a very, very key pivotal role in this. In some cases, it is also playing a very, very pivotal role in choosing the right talent. It's not about analyzing your employees, it's also analyzing who is applying to you. It's a very, very different paradigm which is coming in. The other thing, and Indu talked about it, that we are looking at gamification in a big way. We are, everything needs to be in a game, right? So it's not only about employee engagement. If you look at the entire process of somebody joining an organization, many organizations have made the entire process of introduction and how you, sort of onboard a resource into a game. How do you, look at learning into a game? So, how do I make my entire learning, which had moved from, classroom-based learning to e-learnings? And one of the key drivers around that is, of course, the growth in, mobility, mobile apps. We talked about, the Tech HR app, where people are probably interacting, probably posting, commenting, uploading photos, uploading videos, talking about what they like, what they didn't like. The trend very clearly today is around flexibility, which we all talked of yesterday. The trend is also around the workforce being not only very different from the workforce of previous years, but the workforce also demanding something very, very different. And to respond to that, organizations would actually have to adopt not only digital methods and digital technologies, but they also would have to see what are we trying to do in the future to understand my employees better. One of the key things which people are trying around now is, can I use IoT devices to also monitor engagement levels, concentration levels, stress levels, how a particular person. So when I'm looking at the entire workforce analytics, one of the key things of workforce analytics is coming up from actual data of the workers in the office, where you can find out in the factory or in the different places, how are they working. So in that kind of a scenario, how do you drive engagement? How do you drive integration between people? How do you drive employee motivation levels? How do you recruit the right talent? So those are some of the key questions which we would probably be talking of during the day. And what we also have to understand is that as we go along, the organizations also keep changing, right? The organizations, there are some organizations which are like the large corporates, which keep becoming large and large and large. And then there are organizations who feel that, no, I want to get into microcosms. I want to get into a very fragmented view of things. And I want to encourage individualism inside that fragment. And then there would be organizations which are more socially responsible. There would be organizations which want to drive, collective group behavior into, its people. And as we understand all this, our HR policies, our HR practices, and more importantly, our HR adoption of technology would need to get tweaked because of these. So when we look at, how we drive an HR transformation using digital, we can start from recruitment, but then, in early days, and even when I joined my, first workplace, we used to have these psychometric tests. Apart from your technical tests, you do your psychometric tests to understand the emotional fit of an employee. I think that the psychometric tests of earlier days are passé now. When we look at the global trends, you don't need to do all that. You just find out his LinkedIn profile, his Facebook profile, or other Twitter handles, or wherever he's interacting with. And if you have the ability to crunch that unstructured data which is there about him, you would know everything about him. You don't need to run a psychometric test. You don't need to ask him, what if this happens and how would you react? Because you know exactly how he reacts. So all that can be analyzed, and when you're looking at trying to recruit the top talent, you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to run tests. When you look at the entire recruitment process, again, I think many of the recruitment processes are going through huge changes. Mobile recruitment, how you can do that, how you can use digital technologies to sort of connect with the person, how you can pull him into a video conference across 4 different territories, 4 people talking to him, not as an interview, but as an engagement. Rewards. Sometimes, many times we, think, how do we reward an employee? How do we reward good performance? It's not only about, the monetary reward. It's also about how you, give him the, appreciation for it. How do you give him the actual recognition for it? Reward systems are going through a huge change because of digital. And the way, I do something good in my, my work, how that gets published, not only within the organization, outside the organization, to my family, to my, friends. Learning and performance. We were talking that, gamification is a big, big change in learning and performance. We are talking about mobile learning. We are talking about learning on the go. But then I think one of the key things which is happening is that as we learn more, as we get more engaged, as, almost every organization has an internal social platform, apart from, the other social platforms we have. How do these social platforms talk to each other? How do they talk to, specific performance management mechanisms? Very quickly, we would see that, risk and performance and innovation, all of these would get, pulled into something like a, performance officer, not a chief HR officer, but a chief performance officer, right? And then, of course, with all these kind of data happening, you have the HR analytics piece, which could talk about, cluster analysis, trying to understand how teams should form, which teams would, sort of gel quickly, which teams would have problems. And, as you look at predictive modeling, you would run those predictive models over your employees. You would run those predictive models over, people trying to work together, new projects starting, people from different corners of the world coming and working together. How do you do profiling? How do you see that, this kind of a team would actually take me across? What's happening in terms of what's the value out of all this, right? What do I, generate out of it? You would see that, one of the key things of these kind of an HR transformation is that you can really drive down costs. And those costs can be in, if you look at some of the numbers here, you could have increase in, succession planning scale, right? You could have, 2 to 4% decrease in voluntary turnover, and these are very, very high numbers. 4% decrease in voluntary turnover is a very, very large number. You could have, 25% increase in contribution per, top talent. How do I understand how my top talent is working? How do I increase his performance? How do I engage him better? Most of the organizations are saying that, we can cut down the onboarding time by 99%, right? Just think of it. The onboarding time can be cut down by 99% using gamification, using digital tools. You don't need to, onboard him when he comes on day one. You start onboarding him when you give the offer. So those are, some of the things which is happening around, HR. Of course, you have the workforce which also wants something very different. What we are predicting is that in the, next 3 to 5 years, probably 60% of the workforce in large companies will be temporary. They don't want to work full time. And organizations have to adopt to it. You cannot choose to just sit tight and say that, no, if you want to work, you have to work 9 to 5. Maximum, I'll be flexible with your workplace. You can work from home. You can probably work flexi hours. Gone are those days. People are saying that, no, I want to work 3 months and then I want 6 months off. I would again come back after 3 months. If I'm good, if I'm valuable, you'll find value in me even after 6 months. So those are some of the things which are happening. But one of the key things which we wanted to also highlight is that while all this is happening, you cannot forget the basics, right? While digital is very good, digital adoption is obviously peaking, but you cannot forget the basics. You would still have to be very, very careful around your org design, especially in the new, digital, paradigm. You would have to look at your process, the maturity of the process. That would, in many cases, drive the choices around, digital adoption. You would have to look very carefully at the technology which you're adopting, the platforms which you already have, how they are integrating with your people. So, if you look at people, process, technology, and the organization as a whole, those basics can't be ignored. So the same gamification which works for a PwC might not work for another company. Just wanted to end with keeping you thinking about some of the key considerations. So we talked about global versus local. You have to decide whether it would be a global rollout. How do I do it locally? How do I engage separate clusters? How do I look at specific work groups, focus groups? You have to look at that. You have to look at the existing tech landscape. You can't ignore the kind of investments which have gone into the organization, the kind of platforms you have. You can't ignore the process maturity. So the process maturity would drive not only the choice of platforms, because sometimes people are saying we want to go into a best of breed. Because earlier, we used to have these days that, okay, I'm on one platform, I want to be on that platform. Right now, those days are gone. Everything is an app, right? And the apps can talk to each other. Integration is not a problem. So because of that, you can go for best of breed. But when you go for best of breed, the process maturity has to be considered. Do you have the basic building blocks, which I talked about, the org design? Do you have the basic building blocks around, the grading of the, employees, the competency frameworks? Have you all those? Because only gamification will not take you there, right? So the basic building blocks has to be there, present, beyond which you can build on that. And then, of course, culturally, how much ownership and access you want to give to your employees. I think that's the key, thought with which I would end, that it is about giving ownership to your employees. It's not about you owning a system, whether you're HR or whether you're technology or whether you're IT, and saying that, okay, you are employees in this organization, you can use it. It is about saying, you own the apps, you own the systems, you are free to make changes, you're free to build on them, and we will adopt. So that's, I think, a huge cultural change. So those are some of the key considerations I thought that might be points of thought which you can think of. As I said, it's a privilege and pleasure. Thank you.